Welcome to Don't Retire, Graduate, the podcast that asks you what you want to be when you grow up so you can graduate into retirement with a purpose and a passion. I'm your host and valedictorian, Eric Brotman, and after nearly 200 episodes and a year-long hiatus, Don't Retire, Graduate is back for Season 6. We'll be bringing you interviews with amazing guests every other Thursday, and on alternating weeks, we're hosting a new segment called Diary of a Financial Advisor, which we know you'll all enjoy. So please subscribe and check out our new episodes every Thursday. Today, I am pleased to be joined by Mr. DJ Jeyaram. He shifted his law firm's focus to helping families with special needs in 2009 when his son was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition. DJ specializes in special needs trusts, wills, guardianships, conservatorships, and appealing Katie Beckett and now comp denials, which I confess, DJ, I had to look up so that this is going to be educational for me as well as for our audience. Prior to establishing his own practice, DJ was with large firms' healthcare groups. In addition, his experience includes serving as Deputy Director for Legal Services with the Georgia Department of Community Health and as Georgia Administrative Law Judge with the Office of State Administrative Hearings. In his role as Administrative Law Judge, DJ presided over Katie Beckett and now comp hearings, and he's currently a sitting judge in Gwinnett County, Georgia. DJ, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
This is a very interesting topic and one that I think doesn't get nearly enough attention. And when you and I spoke a couple of weeks ago, because we have some clients in common and some work we were doing together, your story just moved me so much that I was hoping you'd be comfortable to share it with our audience and hopefully to bring light to something really important. So would you be comfortable sharing your story personally with us first, and then we can talk about ways that families impacted by some special needs planning can take action?
Sure. As you mentioned, my son Kai was born in 2009. He was born with a condition called Williams syndrome, which is a genetic deletion. And then a few years later, had an autism diagnosis. And so as my wife and I were going through the process of grappling with, he was our first child. So grappling with the diagnosis emotionally, practically, a lot of information is thrown at you. You know, a lot of people saying you need this, you need to do this, you need to look into this. And we ran down that road and we did all those things. And then without really realizing what we were doing. And so when life calmed down a little bit and we had a special needs trust put in place by a very reputable firm here in town, once it was in place, I went to that attorney and said, look, now that life has calmed down, can you please explain to me how this works? What does it do? How does it help me? And that attorney really wasn't able to answer those questions. And so I kind of got to the point where I said, look, you know, once I learned what it does and how it helps, I said, look, I need to give this information to families in an understandable way. And so that started the very slow pivot from what was a healthcare, corporate, and regulatory practice into a special needs estate planning practice.
So you've been practicing law how long? 20, 30 years?
27 years.
Okay, so we're contemporaries. And over the 30 years or so that I've been in practice, we've helped a number of families with special needs issues, but I dare not say that we're experts on the subject, and we've always needed to counsel with law firms and attorneys with special needs backgrounds. And to your point earlier, a lot of folks say that they have these specialties, but not everybody does, and certainly not everybody's been as impacted personally. So what are some of the ways that you're able to help families who are coping with what can be at least initially devastating and challenging situation in their homes?
So I'd say, the first thing is understanding the tools that are available to the families from a legal estate planning perspective. And by understanding, what I mean is making sure you understand how the documents work, how they interrelate with each other, the concepts behind them. Because ultimately, if the parents don't understand what those documents are, that's my plan or the attorney's plan for their child. It's not their plan for their child. And so the way we try to help families is understanding the documents in just a very understandable, plain English type of way. Answer their questions, take their time. I think one of the benefits I have working for myself is I can spend as much time as I need to with that family and answer as many questions as possible to make sure they understand what's going on. And then tying those documents, once they understand them, into protecting benefits and making sure that their child is protected and cared for if the unthinkable happens and something may happen to mom or dad.
So the legal aspect of this is one slice of a pie that is multifaceted in every way. I mean, there are financial situations, there are government benefits and other types of things to think about. There's tax ramifications. There's certainly healthcare and logistics that need to be considered. And, sometimes it means special transportation. Sometimes it means modifying a home. Sometimes it means, young people who may never be able to live fully independently. So there's a great spectrum here. And as I mentioned in the show's open, I had to look up some of the things that you do because these are terms that I had not been familiar with. Can you talk a little bit about the new option waiver and about the comprehensive support waiver programs, which, we threw out some jargon in the beginning, but quite frankly, this was all new to me. And I thought I really knew what I was doing. So you're teaching me a lot today.
It's really in the weeds. And so the now and comp waiver are Georgia's versions of what are called the home and community-based services waivers at the federal level. So every state should really have a version of it, though they will all differ in the application process, in the waiting list process, and ultimately the benefits received. But certainly in Georgia and in most states, what the now comp and home community-based services waivers are, it's a set of benefits way beyond regular health care. So when people think Medicaid, and these are Medicaid waivers, when people think Medicaid, they think healthcare, and that's perfectly appropriate. It's government subsidized or covered healthcare insurance. But for special needs individuals, people with really significant needs day to day, they need way more than healthcare. And that's where the now comp waiver comes in. It will cover things like transportation, in-home services, sometimes housing. One of the big problems families have is, where will my child live when I can't take care of them and it's not appropriate for them to be living with other people in their private homes? And sometimes there's group homes, there's roommate situations. Now comp will cover the costs for that kind of thing. So it's one of those really, really important financial government benefits that kind of bridges the gap between what I do and what you do, in that it's the legal piece to get that benefit and keep it. And then it ties into what you do, that financial planning piece of how does that subsidization support their financial plan into the future.
So I think the financial world was way behind the government and the legal world in recognizing this as a set of unique challenges. And, the financial world came out with ABLE accounts, which are a form of saving vehicle that allow your special needs child to be essentially the beneficiary of some funds without having control over those funds themselves. Because if your child has funds in their own name, whether they're accidentally inherited or whether they're just titled incorrectly, it can throw a monkey wrench in this whole plan. They could lose their government benefits by virtue of having even a small amount of money in their name. So I want to get into that from a beneficiary and a legal standpoint momentarily. But first, can you talk about the evolution of ABLE accounts and why that's so important for families that are trying to set aside funds for their young special needs kids?
Sure. So as you mentioned, somebody cannot have more than $2,000 in their name and continue to qualify for SSI, Medicaid, KD Beckett, and those now comp waivers we just talked about. And so that raises the question, where do you put that money if you want that child to continue receiving those benefits, but it won't interfere with future benefits as well? So ABLE account, the evolution of that came about because our kids were being incentivized not to work, because they would earn a certain income, they would put their money into a checking or savings account, and if they were saving anything and they got over that $2,000 mark, they would lose their benefits. And the benefits were worth more than what they were making. And so our kids were incentivized to sit at home and, play video games or not have a real focus outside of, entertainment at home. And so that was kind of the purpose of ABLE. ABLE is something where the child or adult child can work and deposit money into the ABLE account and not have it count against them for government resource benefits. And so it's incredibly important. It's allowed our kids to get out there in the community, to work, to find some meaning in work, and without having it affect their benefits.
If I'm not mistaken, the ABLE accounts were designed to model the 529 college savings accounts in some ways. Obviously, they have different parameters and different purposes, but I believe the states have set them up to be very similar to what a 529 would be for maybe saving for education for a non-special needs child. Is that a fair oversimplification?
No, that's absolutely right. And so the ABLE account designation is a 529A. And so it's in that same section of the code. The beauty of ABLE in terms of what you can use it for is you can use it for education just like a 529, but you can use it for broader purposes. You can really use it for just about anything that special needs child needs to assist them with their special needs without having it affect their government benefits. Now, there are some limitations to it. You're generally limited on how much you can deposit into an ABLE account up to the federal gift tax exemption for that year. So this year it's $18,000. My understanding is next year it's $19,000. Those amounts go up a little bit if the child's working. And it has that tax benefit that the 529 has, where, as you know, you are funding it with post-income tax dollars. But once it's in the ABLE and invested, say, in a mutual fund and it's growing year to year, it grows income tax free and remains income tax free as long as it's used for the special needs individual for an allowable purpose.
So it's been said for many centuries that it takes a village to raise a child. And I would say it takes an even larger village sometimes to raise a child who has some special needs. And a lot of family members who are attempting to be benevolent can accidentally mess this up pretty profoundly for their niece or nephew or grandchild or what have you. And so I think more than ever, it's important for families to have conversations around their intentions. They'd like to leave money to your son or daughter, for example, in your case, to leave money to your son. But they can't just name your son as a beneficiary without potentially losing all those government benefits. At the same token, sometimes it happens by accident. If you are named as, I don't know if you have living parents, but if one of your parents was to say, DJ, we're naming you as one of our beneficiaries, but we're naming you per stirpes, such that if you predecease, your kids get your share. And now you've now experienced my extent of Latin knowledge. That's about the end of it. But at that moment, if you were to predecease the account owner, it was to skip you, it would go to your children equally, including your son. That can really mess things up completely innocently and by accident. So how do you counsel families, particularly those families with, where the family tree is more of a shrub and there's relatives all over the place, and you have to find a way to counsel them and say, look, if you want to help, we'd love that, but there's certain special ways you need to do that. Is that something you get involved with some of the families you represent?
I do to a limited extent. What we do is really kind of say, look, and I've had to go through this with my parents. I'm fortunate that my parents are still around. And it's not the most comfortable conversation because you never want to assume people are leaving things to you or leaving things to your kids. But, these government benefits that our kids rely on or may rely on in the future are so important. You might have to have that uncomfortable conversation. So I advise clients, sit down with, mom, dad, brother, sister, whoever on that shrub may want to contribute and to say, look, these are some really important government benefits my child's receiving, and it's super, super important. I'm not to leave, if you are going to leave anything to them, and I'm not assuming you are, and please don't feel any obligation to. But if you are, here's the language to leave it to their trust, or leave it in such a way so it won't interfere with the benefits. But again, I'm not assuming anything, but we have to make sure we protect our child's benefits. And so I think I'm open to better ways to do it, but that's the way I did it, and that's what I suggest to my clients.
Well, anyone who knows me knows I'm a specialist in uncomfortable conversation. So I have no trouble doing that whatsoever. And I do think it's important to have that discussion. And sometimes it's better to have it with an advisor in the room so it doesn't feel like you're saying, hey, mom and dad, I know you're leaving money to my son. And it becomes a very awkward thing for them to say, no, actually, we're not. We're doing something else. It's a permission slip to do it, but also an instruction manual to do it properly. And I like how you said, look, there's no obligation. I'm not saying you need to do this. You have to do this. I don't know if you're doing this or not, but if you are, doing it in the right way is more important maybe than some people realize. And so I do think that's where bringing the whole family together for a conversation, even if it's limited to this discussion, because we all know money in our society is often taboo. Families don't talk about it freely. They sooner talk about medical events than they do financial ones. And so I do think it's one of those awkward, uncomfortable conversations, but so important. Now, when you create a special needs trust, and I know there's lots of different kinds, and I want to avoid getting into too much of the weeds in terms of the specifics, but when you do a special needs trust, which is designed to not inadvertently cost your son or daughter or other loved one the government benefits we've talked about, when you do a trust like that, you have to name, like any trust, you have to name one or more trustees. And sometimes, mom and dad are, in fact, the trustees for their own son or daughter's account, but mom and dad don't live forever. And so you have to have a process of having successor trustees or other folks. Do you see this as a situation where a commercial trustee makes sense, a bank trustee, a lawyer trustee? Do you entrust a sibling or other close relatives who might be closer in age? How do you help families through that? Because that is it's a big obligation. It's a fiduciary duty. It's an important role. And so I'm just curious how you approach that conversation with your clients when they're drafting these trusts.
So that's a great question. And it is one of the hardest questions in a special needs plan, because unlike with a typical child, where your basic typical trust may end when that typical child turns 25, 30, 35, and you're willing to give them their inheritance outright, a special needs trust can last the entire life of that special needs child, which could be 80 years, 90 years. We just don't know. So choosing those successor trustees is super important. We always like to structure our trustee relationship with the guardians of that special needs child, or the power of attorney, whoever's looking out for that child physically, by splitting the role of trustee and guardian. So that is where we start. Said, look, we're going to build in some checks and balances, because obviously you trust your guardians, you trust your trustees when you're choosing them. But we all know life happens, and we've all seen people change. And it's not that they turn bad or evil and they're stealing the money. It could be dementia, or it could be divorce or depression or substance issues. We just don't know. And so by splitting the role, you're creating some checks and balances. I do personally really like friends and family as the first choice for trustees. They can hire financial professionals. They can, through the trust, they can hire the lawyers and the CPAs. But you can't hire someone who loves your child. And so, that's my preference. Maybe that's a little bit of a bleeding heart type answer. But that's my preference. But when you do maybe want more of that expertise, you can always name a professional or even an institution as a co-trustee. So a little bit of both, best of both worlds. You've got family and you've got professionals mixed in, each bringing a different skill set to that trustee role. I always tell my clients, it's three big choices: friends and family, professionals, corporations, which are basically banks and trust companies. And that's the order that I personally prefer them in. I like friends and family first. If you don't have enough people to fill your backup trustees, we suggest 3 backup trustees, 3 backup guardians. That's a lot of people that you trust. Most people don't have that many people they trust. And so if you don't have enough names, that's where it's, look at professionals, look at financial planners are great trustees, CPAs make good trustees. Lawyers, to a limited extent, I think they can be good, but, I really like financial planners and CPAs. And then the banks and trust companies are harder just because they're so big that if the guardian ever gets crosswise with them, it's very hard to move them.
Got it. And financial advisors, for the most part, cannot serve as trustee if they are also involved in managing any of the funds in the trust. That's considered a conflict of interest. And there's I think, some obvious financial impact to maintaining the funds and not paying them out. And unfortunately, unscrupulous folks will make that difficult for everybody else over time.
Sure.
This feels like it takes a lot of people to work together to make this happen, not just the advisors, but family members. Now, when you name a trustee in a trust like this, and you said 3 successors, which is a significant sort of pecking order or chain, a lot of times these trusts also allow trustees to recuse themselves or to resign and to name a successor for themselves. Is that something you see done periodically, just to make sure if there's a situation where a trustee is moving out of the country or something and can no longer be involved for whatever reason, that either they have the backup who you've named or they can name their own successor? Is that a best practice too for these?
So it is. Generally, what we like to do is say, hey, trustee, if you're going to resign or retire, whoever mom and dad have named as the backup, that's who it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we want 3 of them. And if you spread them out by age, now you have a longer lasting plan with longer lasting choices. When you get to the last trustee on that who mom and dad chose, then we do say, look, you can name your successor if mom and dad have not named anybody, but we still like to get some buy-in from that guardian or from the individual themselves if they have capacity, because we want it not to just to be one person's decision. We want everyone to be satisfied with who that successor trustee will be.
Some of the language used in these, the difference between guardianship and conservatorship, for example, these are words thrown around that I'm not sure they're not interchangeable. And my understanding is that a guardian is for a minor, whereas a conservator is for an adult. Is that true, or am I oversimplifying?
So not really. So, and some of it depends on the state you're in, where the terminology is defined under your state statute, and it differs. Certainly in Georgia, guardian, yes, for minors, but you can have guardianship over an adult. And, more typically you see it maybe with the elderly when they lose capacity and a adult child steps in. But for special needs child, you're starting to have that conversation as your child reaches 18, because if they are a special needs child, they probably need some assistance with managing their life. And there's really, in Georgia right now, only 2 legal options on how to do that. And one is guardianship, where mom and dad basically remain in the mom and dad decision-making role. And 2 is power of attorney, where mom and dad become the child's agent when the child turns 18 and can speak with their voice and authority on things like education and finances and healthcare. So guardianship absolutely can continue after the age of majority.
So we've spent a fair amount of time today talking about some of the specifics, some of the legalities, some of the financial and benefits. I'd like to shift gears, DJ, if I can, and talk a little bit about some of the emotional and more qualitative things that go into this, because I imagine doing what you do for a living requires not only a certain skill set legally, but also you called it bleeding heart, but I would just think a very big heart for people who are in challenging situations, either themselves or their families. What kinds of emotional and psychological resources are there for families dealing with this? There must be communities or associations or networks or other types of virtual neighborhoods that folks can utilize to collaborate and share their commonalities. Is that am I on the right track here?
Absolutely. Certainly there are lots and lots of support groups out there, from, the much larger ones, which, will deal with any special need, to the more specific ones for autism or Down syndrome. And so there are definitely groups out there. There are the Facebook groups that are out there. You do have to be a little bit careful about some of the Facebook groups and taking advice from there. But just for emotional support, it's not a bad place to be. And, there are families, you can go to those groups, you can connect with families. One of the hard things about being a special needs parent, and, I think it's fairly commonly known, is we become isolated because we can't necessarily do the things that our typical peers can do in terms of going on vacation and restaurants and outings. And so you tend to withdraw into your little shell. And it is very, very comforting to know there are other families out there who have the same challenges you do. You can connect with them. They'll understand if you have to cancel plans. You'll understand if their child has some kind of behavior. But, that withdrawing into yourself is very natural. But, I think families can find a lot of comfort by expanding out and finding these groups.
And some of these are national, and some of them are at the local level. Are there groups where you can actually go and your son can go with you and meet other kids who are in similar situations? And I imagine that's helpful for him too. What about education? What about schools? And I know this is different by state, but public schools, I know in Maryland, public schools have to have a component of special needs education. And I don't know if all of them do or if the districts have to. And that may differ nationwide also, but there are some schools that have particular resources for particular conditions or situations, but they're very, very expensive. And then there's the public school option where there's some special needs education or special education. How do you navigate that as a parent? I mean, we all want the best education for our kids, but you're looking at this not just from reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also for life skills and coping skills and just being human.
Yeah, no, it's honest. It's a huge challenge. It's a huge, huge challenge. So, as you mentioned, there are private schools out there that can serve special needs kids. They do tend to be expensive. Some states do have what are called special needs scholarships. So, Georgia has something called the SB 10, which means whatever that public school would have spent on your child's special needs services, they can get that as a cash scholarship to apply for payment to a private school. So, there are some funding options out there that are kind of maybe in the weeds in each state. If you do go to public school, there's, of course, every special needs family has heard of IEPs. It's one of those acronyms they throw at you as soon as you get a diagnosis. Yeah. And it's a whole thing. Special needs education is a kind of different area of the law. But each child is entitled under federal law to fair and appropriate public education, which means, if they meet a certain level of need as determined by law, then that school system has to find the funds to serve that child. Every now and then we'll hear families say, well, the school system said they just don't have the money to do that. Money's not the standard. There's a legal standard for need for that service. And if it's determined that they need it, that school system has to find the money.
DJ, I could talk to you all day about this. And our first conversation that I think we scheduled as a 15-minute call that went 90 minutes was a testament to that. You're doing some really important work. And obviously, coming from the heart, you have a a very specific reason for having gotten into this line of work. You know, I can't let you off of my show without asking what you want to be when you grow up, although I think it's going to be hard for you because it sounds like you're pretty well grown up already. So the pressure's on. What is next for you and for your family potentially for as you grow up and as you graduate into whatever retirement looks like for you?
So I'm going to give you two answers. The first answer is, you know, I did a very slow pivot away from my corporate healthcare practice to serving special needs families. And so I kind of feel like I'm doing what I want to do in retirement. I love what I do. I take a lot of pleasure when families leave our conversations and consultations and say, now I understand it. That means a lot to me. So I imagine I'll be doing that and probably drop dead at my desk one day, and that would be okay. Now, if I hit the lottery, I'll be doing this for free for some families. Mm-hmm. But honestly, one of the things my family enjoys as a family, and this is going to be out of left field, is we like decorating for Halloween. And so we always do it for Halloween. My son enjoys it. My daughter enjoys it. My wife and I enjoy it. And so, you know, I would love to go to families who may not be as fortunate and say, look, you know, we're going to set you up for Halloween or Christmas and, you know, do a really nice decoration. So your family and your home becomes the place to see during those holidays. And that's a great way for that special needs kid to connect with that neighborhood.
You know, normally I would say having two answers is breaking the rules, but they were both so good that I give you an A+ on your assignment for that. How can folks who are maybe dealing with some of these issues or who just want a resource or somebody to talk to, how can folks get in touch with you?
So email is always the best way. I am obsessive about checking my email. So my email is DJ, just the two letters, at jeylaw, JEYLAW.com. I'm always glad to talk to families. You know, if it's something I can answer, help them think through in 10, 15 minutes. You know, we never charge anything for that. You know, so if they have questions, please email me. We can jump on a quick call. Like I said, I love what I do and I love talking to the families.
Well, as I knew you would be, you've been a wonderful guest, and you're doing really important work. And I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us this morning.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I'd like to thank all of you for listening and watching today. If you enjoy our show, please subscribe, leave a rating on your favorite podcast platform, and share it with your friends and family so they can join you on your journey to financial freedom. If you'd like to send us a topic you'd like us to discuss in a future episode of Don't Retire, Graduate, please post it on our Facebook page or tweet us at Brotman Planning. We'll be back next week with another entry in our Diary of a Financial Advisor, and in 2 weeks with another engaging guest. For now, this is your host, Eric Brotman, reminding you, don't retire, graduate.
Securities offered through Kestra Investment Services, LLC. Kestra IS. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Kestra Advisory Services, LLC. Kestra AS. An affiliate of Kestra IS. Kestra IS or Kestra AS are not affiliated with Brotman Financial or any other entity discussed.